Coming to you from behind the craziest socialist lines of the Pacific Northwest, local and national news, talk, and opinions, this is the Behind the Line podcast.
The Seattle mayoral debate. I hope you got a chance to watch it. If you didn't, you can find it on YouTube. You should take a minute to watch. I'm also going to link it up on my Facebook page. My first impressions is that Lorena Gonzalez is not a good public speaker. I don't know if she was nervous or what her deal was, but she definitely cannot speak in front of people or the television or whatever very well. She seemed very unprepared, just couldn't really put her thoughts together very quickly. Bruce Harrell, on the other hand, very good speaker, knew what he was going to say and how to say it, and seemed very genuine. He pretty much answered every question directly, did not try to skirt around the issues, seems to have good plans and ideas, well thought plans and ideas. Now, whether they work or not, that's another story, but Lorena Gonzalez, she pretty much skirted every question she was asked. Of course, she's on the Seattle City Council. She's responsible for a lot of the trouble the city is in right now with homelessness and crime and lack of law enforcement. And she pretty much just skirted every direct question about that and just went to her little talking points or tried to somehow throw it onto Harrell. Not good at taking responsibility at all. The debate was specifically about public safety and public health, two very big problems in the city of Seattle. When it came to law enforcement, Bruce Harrell does not want to defund the police. He wants to continue to provide funding for the police and increase police numbers, but he also wants to create a new sort of branch of the police department that is an unarmed civilian type officer to respond to crisis calls like homelessness issues and people having mental health crisis. I do hope he realizes that law enforcement needs to be present at these calls. I think it's a good idea to have a social type worker respond to some of these mental health calls. Someone who's actually trained to deal with people having a mental health crisis, because law enforcement really isn't. And I'm speaking from experience. I was a law enforcement officer for 9 years, and I also worked for 911 for 13 years. And I worked for the fire department for a number of years as well. And so I've dealt with people having crisis in many different kinds of situations. Now, I think I've had more training than the average cop as far as dealing with people in crisis and responding to many different kinds of crises. But for the most part, law enforcement officers are not really trained to deal with people. There's very little de-escalation training that goes on, and there should be more of it. But I think having a social worker present who knows how to deal with that and can offer services that are needed, mental health or housing or other homeless issues for those type of people, who can offer those services directly, is a good idea. And his idea seems pretty solid. But Gonzalez still wants to defund the police. She still sat up there and went on and on about how Seattle police are so violent and abusive, and so many people in the city are being abused by these cops. And it's just not true. There's not that many cases of Seattle cops being abusive to people. She actually said during the protests last summer in Seattle that Seattle cops gassed hundreds and thousands of people for days. Are you kidding me, lady? That just did not happen. Yes, they did gas some protesters that were getting out of control. You know, those protesters that were destroying businesses and running people out of their neighborhoods. Those protesters that murdered two boys up at Chaz, you know, where your city council allowed people to actually take control of a city block for days and days. She's speaking that same stupid, crazy narrative that you hear in places like Chicago and Minneapolis and Los Angeles, and it's just not that way in Seattle. She wants cops defunded. She wants traffic stops, traffic enforcement taken away from cops and given to a civilian, some sort of new civilian department that will handle traffic enforcement. Are you serious, lady? Do you understand that traffic stops are one of the most dangerous things cops are involved in? That's where shootings and assaults happen. You're going to send an unarmed civilian to make those contacts, and then what? Or are we just not going to enforce traffic laws in the city, which really are not that much enforced as it is? People drive like friggin' maniacs in Seattle. People ignore the traffic laws all the time, and I never see anybody getting pulled over or anything done about it. So that really is already happening. In 2016, Obama actually recognized Seattle Police Department for the strides they made and the changes they had made under Chief O'Toole. And she was actually present during the State of the Union address and sat next to the First Lady. And yet Gonzalez, and I'm sorry, but SPD has not gone down the drain since then. So Gonzalez just wants to play this narrative and ignore the facts, ignore business people in the city, ignore her constituents who are asking for help with crime. She just ignores them, literally. When asked directly if she still supported defunding the police by 50%, she would not say. She only said that they should still be evaluating community-based programs and taking certain enforcement responsibilities away from the police and giving them to community-based organizations. Would not answer the question. She said it was important to her that our children come home at night and don't suffer from police violence, as if the cops are out there assaulting children trying to get home. That statement makes no sense. That's some sort of fantasy world you're living in if you actually believe that's happening. When she was directly asked what reimagining the police department looked like for public safety, when there are many businesses and people who don't feel safe because there's not enough officers, instead of answering the question directly, she said that there are many people that feel like they're over-policed. Well, that's not the issue in the city of Seattle right now. And she just said that BIPOC communities feel like they're over-policed. There is a crime problem in Seattle. That's not made up. That's not fantasy. And the only way to deal with that is with police officers and prosecuting criminals. And, you know, she is a supporter of Nicole Thomas Kennedy, who's already said she won't prosecute misdemeanors. So how exactly are you going to deal with all these crimes going on in businesses downtown. Instead of talking about how she would deal with the public safety issues and crimes, she talked about holding cops responsible for being violent and being bad cops. Harrell, on the other hand, knows exactly about how big Seattle Police Department should be, how many officers should be on the street, how they should deal with people downtown. He's gone out and talked to businesses and people downtown to find out what their concerns are and what they need and how he should respond to that. Gonzalez, on the other hand, won't even respond to letters or emails or phone calls from businesses or people downtown. She has not gone down and talked to anybody. She's not interested in that. She's only interested in spouting the narrative, in talking about inequity and injustice by the Seattle police instead of the people perpetrating the crimes. The Seattle police currently have a response time of 10 or more minutes to priority 1 calls, which is completely unacceptable. And Harrell, who was the public safety chair years ago, they had a 7-minute response time, which is acceptable. And he would like to get it back to that. And they also talked about putting up these gunshot monitors around the city that other big cities use, like Chicago, for instance. Basically, it's just a monitoring device that listens for gunshots and tells the police where these gunshots are happening so they can respond to the area, so they can monitor the amount of gun activity going on in certain parts of the city. It works pretty effectively in some of these other big cities that use it, and of course, Gonzalez is against this because it's surveillance equipment. I mean, what are you talking about? It's listening for gunshots. It's not listening to conversations. It's not a camera. Um, I'm not quite understanding what your issue with this is. You don't want to know where gun violence is occurring, or maybe it's that you're afraid to find out what parts of the city that the majority of gunshots and violence is occurring at. And my guess is that is her problem with it. That speaks against the narrative of the wacky left. Harrell said he would open the books and allow people to see where all this money, all this hundreds of millions of dollars that the city is spending on public safety and homelessness and all these other issues where currently we can't seem to get any straight answers. And in some cases, the city leadership admits they don't even know where the money went. They have no way, they didn't track it. They don't know how it was used. They don't know if it was effective. And he's going to change all that by opening everything up, making it public, so that we can see if it's effective and how it works and where it went, which only makes sense. When Gonzalez was asked about the same question, all she would say, this is when she talked about the hundreds and thousands of people being tear gassed and all the complaints that came in during all the protests against the police. She completely skirted that question about if the $100 million was spent effectively. Didn't even attempt to answer that. Typical politician. She is the current public safety chair on the city council and took no responsibility for being in that position or for the city council for the lack of, how of spending that money effectively or efficiently, or even being able to say that it's worked in any kind of way at all for the things they said it was supposed to be used for. She was asked about organized crime downtown. Some of these shoplifting rings are basically organized crime with homeless and drug people. And she didn't even seem to really grasp or believe that it is organized. She's just in this camp that everybody that's shoplifting is taking stuff because they need it. because they're homeless. And she just didn't seem to, the way she answered the question was like, well, if this is organized crime, blah, 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 they should be prosecuted, although those are misdemeanors, and you support the candidate who's not going to charge misdemeanors for city prosecutor, so how is that going to happen? And then she talked about the need for detectives and this and that to investigate. Well, you want to defund the police department by 50%. So how's that going to happen? How are they going to do their effective investigations if they're short-staffed or don't even have the positions they need to do those investigations because their budget was cut? Are you going to have civilians do those investigations? Her answers make no sense, but I guess this goes along with the condition the city is in now and the way things are run. Nothing really makes any sense. There's no common sense. She kept saying for a lot of these issues that we've got to get to the underlying root cause. She wants to talk to people about their feelings and figure out why they're breaking the law. Well, that may be all fine and good if you're doing that with kids. But when you're talking about adults, grown men, talking to those people, and again, this is something I know a little bit about. I was a cop for 9 years. I also ran a bail bonds business for 8 years. Dealt with thousands of criminals who are in and out of the justice system repeatedly. No amount of talking about your feelings with these people is going to do the job. This is how they were raised. This is the life they are in. This is the only thing they know. And so you're talking about something a little more than talking about their parents or how they were raised or all that touchy-feely stuff that really doesn't amount to anything solid with an adult, especially a criminal adult. Prosecution and incarceration, though, oftentimes can get the message through that maybe it's time to change behavior, consequences. But the talking about it, I'm telling you, these people, these criminals know how to use the system, how to abuse the system to get what they want, to stay out of jail. Drug court is often used in lieu of incarceration, or was, for repeat offender or drug users. And man, I know a lot of those people, and they know exactly what to say to prosecutors and judges to keep out of jail and just keep on the wheel, keep on the circle, keep going around, to stay out and commit more crimes and use more drugs. They know how to abuse the system. They know all the tricks. So you're not going to talk to these people and get them to change their ways. It is so unrealistic, and it's so obvious that a person saying something like that just does not understand the criminal element or law enforcement or any of that stuff, how things actually work on the streets. People that say things like that have never actually dealt with that criminal element in any meaningful way where they would understand how that works on the streets. She also seems to think that if you give these criminals a house and a job, that suddenly they'll change their ways. Most of these people are addicted to drugs, and unless you deal with the addiction, nothing else is going to change, because they've got to break the law and steal things to pay for their addiction. And unless that person wants to quit, they're not going to. And again, I will go back to my experience with people in drug court who repeatedly show up there because they can't quit or don't want to. And you can't tell them they have to. Until a person makes up their own mind that they want to quit, and for the right reasons, it's not going to happen. And the other part of this is when they get out, if they have quit and they go back to the same friends, the same community of people where they had these problems, it is almost certain that they will fall back into drug use again. They have to get away from those people. They have to get a new friend group. They have to be away from all the influences that cause them to abuse drugs in the first place. Anyway, in the end, all Gonzalez could talk about is getting rid of bad cops, reducing the police department. She didn't address anything directly. And voting for Gonzalez is just a vote to continue things the way they've been going in Seattle, which I think everybody can look and see is not good. There's homeless people everywhere. There's garbage everywhere. There's crimes being committed everywhere. Crime is way up. Murder is way up. A vote for her is just voting for the same old or worse. Because if she gets in there as mayor, even if Nicole Thomas Kennedy does not get elected as prosecutor, she could still set policies that officers won't arrest people for misdemeanors or, charge them with misdemeanor crimes. So this is something that we don't need in the city of Seattle right now. We are in a major crisis, and this could be a turning point. But if we put her in there, we are turning and dropping off the cliff. So I would recommend that Bruce Harrell, who I don't agree with on everything he says, he is more of a liberal, but he's sort of more of the middle of the road, which I think would be good for Seattle right now, to start crawling out of this hole that we've dug ourselves into and try to get the city back on track. Either way, get out there and vote. You still have a right to do that. You've got a few days left if you haven't done it yet, so please do, because the city needs your vote, and your vote does matter in these local elections. Hey guys, thanks for listening to the Behind the Line podcast at behindthelinepodcast.com. If you liked this, I hope you will like, share, and subscribe to our channel. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Facebook at Behind the Line WA. You can find us on Twitter at Behind WA. You can also find us on Telegram and LinkedIn at Behind the Line. And I'm on Rumble. Thanks again for listening, and I appreciate your support.